Finally, the air war in Ukraine and the Russia-Ukraine war is starting to come into focus. So stick with us on Flywire as we look at the losses on both sides. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on Flywire we're going to take a look at losses for the Russians and the Ukrainians in the skies over Ukraine. This is update number 4, sitrut number 4. There's a lot happening today, and since I posted update number 3 a couple of days ago, the in-game maneuvering is starting to play out, definitely coming into focus. YouTube did not demonetize my update number 3, so I guess I've arrived as a controversial YouTuber or something, who knows. Not quite sure how I did that, but hey, what the heck. Before I get to the air war, I just want to do a quick recap. I can't help myself. There's just so much happening right now. At this point, the Ukrainian offensives around Kiev that I talked about in Update 3 are pushing some army units back to the border. In the Turkish negotiations, Russia has declared that they are going to pull back and redeploy those forces elsewhere in Ukraine, primarily in the east. I see that as doublespeak. I mean, the Ukrainians are winning, so the Russians are going to pull their units back. Maybe, as far as they're concerned, saying that as a way that might keep the Ukrainians from harassing them on the way out, I guess. Essentially, it sounds as if two Russian armies in the north have completely collapsed between eastern Kiev and the Russian border. There are reports of ground engagements within 8 miles of the Ukraine-Russian border and shelling into Russia itself. This is a significant development, make no mistake. I just realized that a lot of you may not know what some of this lingo means, Combined Arms Army, all that kind of stuff, so FYI. Typically an army is made up of 2 or more corps. A corps is made up of 2 or more divisions. A division is 2 or more brigades. A brigade is made up of at least 2 battalions of the base unit type, armor, infantry, such like that. Each battalion has at least 3 company-sized base units, and a company has 3 platoons. At each level, there are various support elements attached to handle various specialized tasks like artillery, air defense, weapons, chemical, biological, nuclear defense, logistics, things like that. I'm not even going to try to put a number on troop sizes in each unit. It varies quite a bit between country and between type of unit. Suffice it to say the division is generally between 10 and 20,000 troops. I know it's a pretty big number, but what the heck. The Russians seem to like creating a lot of army-level units as opposed to U.S. military organizations, and organizations like that have a lot of brass and a lot of layers of command, and that just doesn't equate to effectiveness. I don't see how it could. Those units in the north are not in any shape to go back to Russia and then move down to the Donbass, the Mariupol area. They have been decimated in men and equipment. They're probably combat ineffective at this point. The Russian advance on Kherson and from there to Odessa has been blunted. That's in the south. Another Russian general, this one the CEO of the Combined Arms Army at Kherson, has been killed. Odessa is no longer under threat, and Kherson may go back to the Ukrainians. There are peace talks being broken by the Turkish, and it appears the Russians are no longer demanding denazification. The Ukrainians are signaling that they'll give up the idea of joining NATO. There might even be a face-to-face between Putin and Zelensky. You know, I personally have doubts about that happening. I just can't see Putin doing that. Remember from the first video in this series, I talked about Russian logistics being dependent on railroads? Well, there have been reports of 2 trains carrying Russian equipment being derailed in Belarus, not Russia, not Ukraine. But supply trains continue to be vulnerable inside of the borders of Ukraine as well, with Bayraktar TB2 drone strikes on 2 of those fuel trains. In return, the Russians are targeting Ukrainian logistics with cruise missile strikes on Ukrainian fuel, supplies, ammo depots, and repair factories, apparently with some effectiveness. Now let's look at the air war, finally. 3 days ago, the Russians claimed to have shot down 4 Su-24s and 1 Su-27. Adding those 5 shoot-downs, the Russians have claimed destruction of more aircraft than the Ukrainians had at the beginning of the war 5 weeks ago. And don't believe they've been supplied with any, at least not that have been reported. I've got some good loss numbers from Oryx to talk about in a second, and I don't know what the final tallies are going to be, but it looks like the losses on both sides are less than claimed by a significant margin. Interestingly, a Russian Su-30 was shot down near Izium 2 days ago. That's up somewhere near Kharkiv. The pilot, Colonel Sergei Koisik, was captured alive, and the fate of his crewmate was unknown. It's a 2-man airplane. Under interrogation, the colonel confirmed that the Russians were bombing coordinates and not specific targets. Take that or leave it. I don't know what to believe at that point, but it does confirm what I was saying was happening. There is a report that 4 Armenian Su-30s and their pilots have joined the Russian squadrons. Apparently, the state of their training is worse than Russian Air Force pilots. So it's going to be interesting to see how they fare. Maybe we'll find out after the war, maybe we won't learn anything. The Turkish TB2 Bayraktar drone is doing well, and it appears that Russian SAMs are having a hard time shooting them down. There is some evidence that the U.S. loitering drone called the Switchblade is being used in Ukraine. Russian reports of UAV downings have skyrocketed recently, and not commensurate with Ukrainian UAV losses. The Switchblade can loiter in the target area for 15 to 30 minutes, or 40 minutes even reportedly, before being committed to a target by a remote operator. There are 2 versions, one an anti-personnel and the other anti-armor. The warhead and size vary, as does the loiter time for each version. Oryx reports that the TB2 has the TB2 destroying 6 armored fighting vehicles, 5 towed artillery, 1 MLRS, 10 SAM systems, 2 command posts, 1 comm station, 9 helicopters, 24 support vehicles, and those 2 fuel trains I mentioned a minute ago. Russian claims a whole lot of them shot down, but Oryx only reports one TB2 loss so far. The TB2 is a small drone with limited weapons capability, but from the shape of it, it does look to have a fairly low radar cross-section. It's powered by an internal combustion engine with a pusher prop, and likely also has a very low heat signature from below, meaning that it's hard to see, hard to target. Speaking of Ukrainian losses, Oryx reports 9 UAVs lost, 7 destroyed and 2 captured, one of those being that TB2. 3 Ukrainian helicopters and 1 AN-26 transport have been shot down, and they have lost 3 MiG-29s, 2 Su-27s, 5 Su-25s, and 1 unknown fighter for a total of 12. The reports peg Ukrainians as still having about 50 operational fighters, and they're flying a limited number of sorties, but I can't confirm the number, so I'm not even going to mention it. Now for Russian losses, that appears to be 70 vehicles of all types. This and the picture results on Oryx reveal that 18 UAV losses for the Russians, 12 destroyed, 6 captured, 35 helicopter losses, 30 destroyed, 3 damaged, 2 abandoned. Aircraft losses are reported to be 8 Su-25s, 4 Su-30, 4 Su-34 strike aircraft, and 1 AN-26 for a total of 17 aircraft. I'll leave a link below to the Oryx website, but don't forget that they primarily compile their lists with photographic evidence, so these numbers are very possibly an undercount, and we won't get truly reliable numbers until well after the war is over. But I do think that this site gives us a reliable number to flesh out the relative status of the forces. And one thing that stands out is the fact that these numbers are far smaller for both sides than what both sides have been claiming the other guy lost. What is it, wishful thinking, or it's a propaganda tool? But the losses are smaller than predicted, and that's probably because the air forces on both sides are fully aware of the losses they would sustain if they flew in Ukraine airspace at medium altitudes. I still don't see any effort on either side to pursue a real SEAD campaign, suppression of enemy air defense. Lethal or non-lethal, I'm not seeing any of it. There is a de facto no-fly zone over the country, and I haven't heard any more talk about that in the news lately. I guess that's not on. As I said in my last video, There is some flying by both sides in the airspace, but it is all primarily low and fast, and without accurate weapons and virtually no training in them, I just don't see how they can be effective. The Russian Su-30 is a perfect example of that situation. This morning, before I started filming doing this film, the Russians attacked Kiev with missiles, and apparently a couple of those were shot down. I say apparently, I haven't had any other reports on that, and I'm not watching the news this morning anyway. So Russia is pursuing this level it strategy that I mentioned in the first video, and they're bombing and shelling areas in the east that are still held by the Ukrainians. And whether the Russians will be able to consolidate their gains in the east or forcefully keep the Donbass, Luhansk regions, well, I think that remains to be seen. Given the success over the last few days, I suspect that both sides are now fighting for the upper hand with a view to creating a favorable situation for them in the negotiations and the end game. So here's an interesting thing. These are some flight paths of these aircraft around Ukraine in the last day or so in Poland. This is fascinating. I'm sure this is a NATO mission in Poland, and what we have here is a USAF air refueling tanker, and that's the oval anchor, or the place where the refueling takes place. This is an electronics intelligence gathering aircraft, RC-135 of some kind, and it's gathering inland, from Russia and Ukraine. And then this is a NATO air refueler. It looks to be an Airbus. Finally, this is a B-52 orbiting in Romania, and reports are that B-52 orbited for 3 hours. You know, what I don't like is all the good guys' positions can be tracked via the internet from anywhere. It's great to see this, but it's not exactly good operation security situation. This is a snapshot of 3 airplanes and 1 NATO airplane. And they're all supporting combat air patrols over the Polish border, on the Polish border, as well as keeping track of the situation in Russia and Ukraine. This is the traffic in the region. No radar participating traffic is near Ukraine and only a little well north of Russia. Essentially, there's a no-fly zone here. The radar coverage over Ukraine will pick up any aircraft or helicopter over 5K or so, but they're not going to put it in this tracking system. This is Flight Radar 24. The picture of the air war, from my perspective, is one of airspace dominated by opposing SAMs and unchallenged by either side. High-risk sorties and onesies and twosies don't make an effective air campaign, period. And they're not even there's no way to be a decisive use of air power. It's almost a waste to send airplanes there and get them shot down. If you're not going to deal with SEAD, it's just too big a risk. From an international standpoint, it appears that Ukrainian leadership is talking about paying the iron price for a Russian aggression. They're signaling the Russians that they'll give up their desire to join NATO as a part of negotiations. And apparently the average Ukrainian citizen is furious with that notion, and they believe their future is in NATO and the EU, and they don't want to be held beholden to Russia in any way. I think it likely that Ukraine is destined to become part of EU, perhaps sooner rather than later, soon after the war. And from a rebuilding aspect, I think there will be a strong case made to do so. Eventually, I see EU status leading eventually to membership in NATO. This is complicated. It's going to be complicated. In Russia, they're going to want their economy back, so there's going to be some horse trading going on here. None of this is going to solve the underlying issues between Russia and Ukraine, period. So it makes you wonder what we have to face in the future. There have been some great comments for each of the videos that I've done so far on this topic, and that begs the question, how do you see the negotiations ending up? I see 3 main options. With the current state of the war, Russia's original goal of installing a puppet government to replace Zelensky and his parliament have completely failed. They're totally off the table. So possible options here are a peace deal whereby Russia holds their conquests in the east, keeps Crimea, and the right to keep their army and local bases as well. The Ukrainians change their constitution to preclude NATO membership, and I think surely Zelensky is smart enough not to take the bait here and allow the Russians to rearm while the Ukrainians are divided and demilitarized. That's just begging the question of when, not if. Additional local success on the battlefield strengthens Zelensky's hand to avoid this solution, and that is what I think we're seeing on the ground right now. Perhaps a deal where Russia leaves Ukraine altogether. Then he refuels and rearms and remands the divisions preparing to launch the next phase of the invasion. In all likelihood, UN units of peacekeeper troops would be needed as a buffer between both sides, and that's pretty dangerous in and of itself. So this just becomes another signpost in what is developing to be a long-term Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Finally, a peace deal where Ukraine does not abandon their aspirations to become part of EU and NATO, with Russia exiting post-2014 Ukrainian borders, which leaves Crimea and Sevastopol in Russian hands. You know, I have a hard time that Russia's going to agree to that, given that Putin's instructions to the negotiator that he wanted delivered to Zelensky via the negotiations is that he's going to eradicate Ukraine. At least that's the report. That's pretty aggressive and hostile. And that's in keeping with Putin, frankly. This seems like a hard issue to overcome. I'm not sure how you do that. So, what do you think the solution is going to be? Leave me a comment below and we'll see who's a good prognosticator. I'm not picking a bet for me personally. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Flywire.